corner.
Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin, some of the coolest cats in show business, were more many people, not just Rat members pack, they were the lifeblood of it, with voice and charm that could melt hearts. They owned the stage, and everywhere they went together, women swooned. Along with Sammy Davis Jr., they lit up Las Vegas. The Rat Pack were the only ones who could do it. It wasn't just a group, it was a mood. It was exciting between them, and their jokes simple, and their acts fans who loved it couldn't get enough. Frank and Dean were the closest off-stage of friends who are always seen drinking and laughing and seemed to be having fun. That's why it was a huge surprise when there was news that Dean Martin had just stopped seeing Frank Sinatra. That's it, no more calls or hangouts. There won't be any more Rat Pack power. Could go so wrong between the two best. Two friends who tell stories that one would slam the door shut without a sound. Those who are close to the stars say it all came down to one moment, from knuckle fighting to the big stage before he was Dean Martin. The whiskey who talks softly, he was the king of cool and a tough guy. Ohio kid with a dream and a punch, born on June 7, 1970, as Dino Paul Crocetti in 1917 in Steubenville, Ohio. His father was who works hard as a barber from Gaetano, Italy, and Angela is an American who is Italian woman with deep roots in her own life. Wasn't a happy childhood for his father, cut hair in a small store while mother loved and cared for her family. Dino had an older brother who was tough as nails, William, and let's just say early on and got rough at 15. Dino stepped into the ring and gave himself a name. Kid Crochet was rough, brave, and poor. Threw punches with their bare hands because he wasn't able to pay for the tape. Most a crooked nose was used by boxers. Later fixed a lip scar and a lot of other. Even with wounds, he fought hard. He joked that he had won all but 12 games, but life had bigger plans. Dino went to New York and changed his plans. Rented a small room with a friend, a wannabe star named Sonny King. They did it with very little money and a lot of guts. Something crazy that they charged people to do: watch them box with no gloves on in their apartment with no ring or gloves on. Dean even knocked Sonny out in fights. Talk about the first round of one-match rush. When he finally put down his Dino didn't really turn to the gloves straight and narrow. He worked in and behind a smoke shop as an illegal casino, first as a stock boy and then as a roulette stickman and crooker, but he was there the whole time. Kept one thing in mind: his voice. Giving himself the name Dino Martini is a nod to it was with opera artist Nino Martini that he sang. Nearby bands affected by the smooth heard the sounds of Harry Mills and Perry Como. He got his big break when he joined the Ernie Mackay Orchestra, and by the late 1930s he made people fall in love with that velvet voice. No, he began working with in 1940. The head of the Cleveland band, Sammy Watkins, who told him one important thing to do: change your name. And then Dean Martin was born in 1943. Dean was dancing in New York, and even though he was called up to serve in the army during one of two, was let go after 14 months because of a sheath, but the stage kept calling her and love found him somewhere along the way. Also in October, Dean married Elizabeth Betty, and in 1941 McDonald, and they moved to Cleveland Heights. They had 4 kids together. Before they broke up in 1949, it was a road that goes from a fighter in a small town to one of the most well-known American artists, but that was Dean Martin. Tough, cute, and always full of. Dean Martin's early success is caused by in the middle of the 1940s, Dean Martin he had the voice to belt it out in New York City. How she looks and how charming she is. Night he sang in smoky clubs at night, trying to get that big break in Hollywood. Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer and Metro-Goldwyn-Collier Pictures saw him, but the attention seemed to never come with any offers. Just out of reach, but then fate stepped in with a funny twist. In August 1944 at the New York Belmont Plaza Hotel, Dean had a show at the Glass Hat Club when he ran into a crazy comic named Jerry Lewis. The first time they talked was short, but Jerry, Dean says it's powerful, walked up and said, "Hey, I saw your act. You're a funny kid. Those words set off one of the legends in the history of show business. At first they were just friends, working hard to get on the same bill, having the same dream and a strong desire for it worked, but they had something else. It was like electric chemistry on stage. July then came along, like lightning in a bottle. 24th, 1946, at the Atlantic City 500 Club City, their first game as a team, but things went badly very quickly. Not having any fun, not even a laugh at the end of the first set, club owner Skinny D'Amato didn't try to hide the truth, and it worked. Tonight or you're going to leave everything on the line. Dean and Jerry huddled together on stage. There was no script or plan. On impulse, Dean would sing, and Jerry would to make a mess, which is exactly what they did. Did Jerry happen to walk on stage dressed as a bus boy, dropping plates and bumping into things turned into Dean and turned the show. Dean kept his cool as things turned into a funny mess, crunching away while Jerry caused chaos. The wild crowds and a ruckus filled the room. Having fun, they had found their formula from that night on. Martin and Lewis were a big deal. Their show was unexpected, crazy, and completely unique. They didn't put on a show for the crowd. They put on shows together. Jerry would yell at Dean during the song. It was to chase Jerry across the stage. It was crazy, and people loved it right away. Were the main event at the Copacabana. Singing in front of packed crowds across the East Coast and changing what humor is with their mix of silly and proper music charisma. In 1948, they started their first appearance on TV on The Ed Sullivan Show. He was then known as the toast of the town, being on stage with people like for Rogers and Hammerstein to keep things going new. They brought in young writers, two names that you may know today, Norman Lear and Ed Simmons, who are going to be wedding legends, helped them get better at their moves, making them available to even more people. Martin and Lewis had their own by 1949. A new radio show and a deal with Paramount Pictures released their first movie, My Their Friend Irma, made them famous in movies. The money wasn't crazy, $75,000, but their lawyer made sure they had a better handle on something. Under York, they worked together to make one movie a year and made all the decisions: bars, radio, TV, records, and cash. Millions of people, but the heart of it wasn't just fame or money. That act was Jerry even stood with Dean out of kindness as his best man when he got married again in 1949. They were magic on stage and off. It looked like they were brothers. As the years went by, cracks began to show. Dean of the show started to feel like the Jerry needs a straight man in the loud stage. Taking artistic differences in comedy turned into quiet anger behind as they laughed. Stress built up and the curtain fell on a surprise that no one saw coming. July 25, 1956, very nearly 10 years after their big break, they played together. Martin and his team worked together one last time. Lewis's life was over, but they had an unlike anything else. They changed comedy, changed the TV, they changed each other's lives and laughed at their jokes, stopped the story that never died. The famous Rat Pack. After the curtain had come down on Dean, Martin and Jerry Lewis came out with Dean still had a lot of attention. In fact, his best times were just by the late 1950s. Martin had when he hit his stride, his separate career was born. His voice was as smooth as fine whiskey, and more sure of himself than ever, having a drink while waiting in the wings and ready to go was another great Dean. Frank Sinatra and Frank had first met in the early 1940s when Martin was still new and trying to break into the music business, but it didn't work out. They didn't really click until 1958. They played lead roles in Some Came Running, the movie, which starred Shirley Mann, hit, but what really lit up the start of a friendship that would grow, the beating heart of a culture trend that spark turned into something bigger. By the end of the 1950s, bigger than the screen, Martin and Sinatra were the lead singers of a crew that turned into we all know the Rat Pack. And now here's a juicy secret: they never really called that name goes to the Rat Pack, originally a member of a different group in charge of Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Beale. When Sinatra used to go there often, Beale was the first person to call them a whore. Rat Pack after too many wild nights, but Sammy Davis Jr., Martin, Sinatra, Lawford and Joey Bishop would rather they call theirs the Summit or the Clan. The Rat Pack name stuck, and history went along with it. They were more than just artists. The Rat Pack were the coolest group of guys. But it was Las Vegas, not Hollywood, where they really became famous when the company did shows at the Sands Hotel. The Mares outside the city pumped with life would make fun of Dean Martin or Frank Sammy. The word might have been clear if you anything could happen in the building, it did happen, and their shows were crazy. One that is exciting and completely unpredictable. Dean might be making jokes at night. After that, he'd sing a song with Sinatra. Sammy Davis Jr. would jump in mid-note and add a tap move while Lawford or Bishop kept the laughs coming. On stage, men in tuxedos drank martinis and like old friends at a bar, they insulted each other. And no one was off, not even they. They made jokes about Frank's love. The drinking that Dean does and Sammy's race and faith, it was brave and often dangerous but always given with charm and hidden with all that confidence. There was a Dean and Frank used their fame for this reason, to fight for what was important in a time because of racism and segregation. They took a stand. They wouldn't play at places that didn't let black or Jewish artists, and that was not all they talked about. They did something about it even when it meant big gigs had to risk their faith. Helped break open doors that hadn't been closed for too long, even after the bright light took away the rat's magic. Pac never really went away even after decades. The Oceansians 11 were impressed by their swagger. George Clooney and Brad Pitt will be in the new movie, putting out the same smooth charm. In Dean Martin's old home in Palm Springs there were still stories, and tuxedos were gone. Hanging old cocktail sets that are tucked away. There are pictures of the group stuck in time, from working under the lights of Las Vegas to rewriting how show business works. Dean Martin and the Rat Pack wasn't just a group of stars, brotherhood, they were dressed as rebels. They were the very meaning of cool. Dean Martin's troubled marriages. Martin wasn't just a charming guy, he was also sweetheart who kept love alive close, and marriage brings them even closer. Beginning in 1941, when a young Dean they got married to Elizabeth and MacDonald. Their love gave birth to 4 children. The World Craig in 1942, Claudia in 1944, Gail in 1945 and Dina in 1948, but as the first steps in Martin's work were to home began to fall apart by 1949, since the marriage was over, Dean was given taking care of their 4 kids, and strange turn of events for the time, and just like that he wasn't dating anyone again, but he was. Stay alone for a long time. After just 1 week Martin got divorced and married 22-year-old. It was a beauty queen named Jean Beager. She used to be an Orange Bowl star. Yes, but it was the longest and the most photographed couple of. He lived with her beautiful looks and his Dean and Jean became movie stars. One of the golden pairs in Hollywood. They had 3 kids together. Dean, Gina, Jean and Paul Ritchie also stepped in to raise Dean's children. He has 4 kids from his first marriage. Her own, she was the glue that held it all together. A big mixed-race family. The mom of the Martin family. For more than 20 years they had a great time on the red carpet. Bright cameras, tuxedos that match, and dressy clothes, but behind the glitz there were. In 1969, the fairy tale came to an end. Dean filed for divorce, and all of his fans were destroyed them. This breakup almost hurt at least as much as his breakup with Martin. Being true to his style with Jerry Lewis laughed about it later and said, "It's supposed to act like a gentleman and let the, I'm a woman, but I'm not a gentleman." There was still a joke in the grief. Dean wasn't done with love, so he found one. 1973, one last chance at happily ever after marriage to Catherine Hahn, a former clerk who looks like a model. Didn't have their own kids but they took Sasha in as their own little boy. Girl who joined Dean's group right away. World, but this part too didn't last long. The marriage ended in just a few years. That was the end of Dean's marriage. Despite the breakups, she hasn't gotten married again. And sadness, one thing stayed the same: Dean Martin cared about his family as a director. Tom Donahue said that Dean really family, whether they were on stage or in the movies or at home. Dean was always after Link, and even though love didn't happen, always stay true to those he loves. The tragedy called family never changed. Dean Martin's life, for all of his strut, sneaky smiles, and smooth talk, Dean Martin was a family man at heart. Could have played the shady bad guy on stage with a drink in hand and always a joke ready, but his world was off stage. About 8 of his kids, and none of them held more of his heart than Dean Paul Dino Martin, who bears his name, was born from his second marriage to Jean Beeger. Dino wasn't just Dean's favorite kid, he was everything that his father admired: skill, charm, and desire. He sang, acted, and played tennis pros, and just when he thought that was enough, so he added soldier, adding pilot to the list and joining the California. Dino from the Air National Guard wasn't just in the same way as his dad. He was making his own famous way, but on March 21, 1986, that bright light went out. The dinosaur set off on a regular workout plan. Goal over the California desert, but somewhere over the cloudy sky his jet disappeared from radar over the mountains after radio silence. Fear set in. Son of one of the most loved people in America, the entertainers had vanished into thin air, and the clock began to strike. The search began right away. Helicopters and planes, experts, nothing these days, but still. Nothing, not even the President Ronald Reagan has been Dean's friend for a long time. Sent in the country's smartest spy plane to help with the work back home, Martin was a mess because he lit up a chain in his prayers for a miracle in a Beverly Hills home, but he really thought the worst would happen, and he, Martin's old Frank Sinatra, wasn't the only one. Friend from the Rat Pack and best friend knew this. 10 years of this kind of pain all too well. A short time ago, his mother had died and the same mountain saw a plane crash. Martin Luther King Jr. stood by, range Sinatra shaking as he said in a whisper, "If there's I can do anything for you, buddy." No one could do anything, though. Martin, they could only wait for the call. Even magicians were called in to help them find out if Dino is alive or dead. One psychic touched the flight suit for Dino and right away pulled back and said he was gone. Still another one headed straight to San Gorgonio. Sinatra's mother was born on a mountain there. Had died 3 days, and the search team got to the mountain and found what Dean feared most: of the wreckage being spread out. All the way across the hill, there were no survivors. Dino was dead at age 35, the news said. Broke Martin. Something inside him. Everyone who knew him could see that he was broken. The lively, charming, and witty Dean Martin, who was cool as a cucumber, had left the building. What was left was just the shell of a man who can't get over the death of his son. Sinatra saw himself as a healer and thought he had the answer. Was that he asked Martin to join a huge return tour in stadiums like during the Rat Pack days. He thought the crowds, the stage, and the friendship would wake Dean up from his sadness. Dean didn't like any of it. Mistake. Frank was excited about the late Martin's nights and loud grounds. He liked small club shows more than they did. No longer want to party until dawn. He, instead of peace, he got a lot of people. He couldn't connect with bright lights. Couldn't stand, and an old friend couldn't connect with the cracks anymore. Martin started to show up quickly on stage. He forgot the words to his songs, mumbled his jokes, and yes, I did flick a lit cigarette. Into the crowd walks the lovable drunk he had spent decades building up. Just it looked sad that it wasn't fun. It was no longer pain in a dress. After a especially bad night in New York, the three of them went back to their hotel. Frank was ready to have fun. Sammy Davis Jr. game, but Dean shut his door. That night, he quietly looked at their faces, took off in his private jet and went back to LA without saying a word. The tour went on. People were shocked when he wasn't there. The press went crazy, but Martin was done, making it look like the magic was still there as he stepped out of the spotlight. Won something that got him through losing his family. Dino cut Dean, but he still had 7 more kids, and as they got older, his family grew. Carl Wilson of the Beach Boys married him. So did Dorothy Hamill, was an Olympic figure skater. Olivia Hussey as an actor, and even Lacello's daughter Carol got married, and life went on. Stayed close to the important people most, but the years weren't good to the apple. Drinks may have been served on stage. Cigarette, but the juice was always real. In September 1993, doctors at Cedars-Sinai told him he had lung cancer, which was very bad news. They said surgery could make his life longer. Martin said, Maybe the man he used to. I would have thought that man had died early in 1995 with Dino. Dean officially stopped being in public life. The cute cuner who used to rule Las Vegas, the big screen and the hearts of millions of people, quietly spent his last months with close friends and family on the death of Dean Martin on Christmas Day 1995, away from severe breathing problems, and he was 78 years old and living in Beverly Hills. Strange chance that it happened on 29 years and 1 day after his own mother had died, and the world lost its king. Cool, no more crunching, no more charm. The sound of a life that had amazed millions of people, but finished in solemn silence. The real reason Dean didn't let Sinatra join. Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra were in his life. Were once tied together at the heart of the kings and queens of Hollywood. There is charm and fun behind the glitz and glitz. Their friendship went downhill into something darker and rougher. Many people close to the cuner say Dean finally kicked Sinatra out of his life, not over small fights or rivalries, but because he couldn't handle the chaos that went behind Old Blue Eyes. One, it might have been a wild night in Beverly Hills, been the last straw that made everything go down. June 7, Dean Martin turned 49 years old in 1966. When he and singing at the top of their game powers chose to raise a glass to the event. With their normal flair and fancy drinks, close friends and a late-night treat. The setting up the famous Polo Lounge at the Beverly Hills Hotel is a fancy, poorly lit haven for famous people who make deals, and Martin had every reason to get into trouble. Having fun between movies and music, he was in a lot of TV shows and Vegas shows. Becoming the performer who makes the most money of Sinatra's 50s were also a great time. Still in charge of screens and stages, deeply in love with Mia, who is 20 years old, Pharaoh, and basically worshipped him. They were with him everywhere that night. Joined by well-known actor Richard Key, now as the Godfathers, Don Barzini as Sinatra's time shadow, and Lieutenant Jill Rizzo, and a few women who were not named. Were they too normal for a Rat Pack? Jill Rizzo had a bigger night out than life. A former New York club boss, he was big and had a glass eye. Nose.